So let's change course here and talk about from a biblical perspective. How would you go about building a stable Sudan? What would be the ingredients necessary to go there if you're kind of rebuilding the nation from the ground up?
This is going to sound messed up, but there's a couple ways to go about this. You could take the Old Testament route, and you could just tear down all the idols, tear down everything else, and reconsecrate the country to the Lord. That would, be kind of let's just say, an extreme step.
That's a Muslim approach, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, they both took it from the same place, right?
Yeah.
So I think the hard part in dealing with all of these things is, setting up a stable country requires stable people, right? You need people who are united in an ideology. So, first of all, to make that happen, you have to teach that ideology. Um, and again, I think part of the problems is we've talked about, like, let's spread democracy in the Middle East, right? And it doesn't take. Well, all of a sudden you're trying to spread Christianity, right, in the Middle East. As a Christian, you would say we need a Western style democracy based on some, core principles of Western style democracy that came from Christianity, right? I don't know if that would work there because I mean, that would take generations to do, and I mean, I keep thinking about Afghanistan, right? Like, we tried to do it. We tried, well, whoever we is, but it was tried in Afghanistan and it failed mightily, right?
Yes.
I would say, Iraq's a little bit of a different story because there was at one point a parliamentary system before Saddam. So at least they were able to kind of go back into their own past and point at a moment in time where, they were at least striving for democracy. So I think the advice would be to the people and not necessarily the system. My advice would be, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, I will hear them from heaven. I will, move and I will bless those people. And I think it's hard in the middle of all right, you're being killed, you're being raped, you're being murdered, you're being so in your analogy, is there a clean slate, right? Is there a way to be able to look at this conflict and say, we're starting over? But that has to come from the heart, right? Like
Right.
the heart has to go, these things that we have invested ourselves in have drawn us to this place of death and bloodshed and decades of waste, right? Like, we haven't been plundered necessarily by outside forces as much as we've plundered ourselves, right? And you need to come to that kind of realization. Real change happens when you're at the bottom. It doesn't happen when you're at the top.
Right.
When you're at the bottom, you start to go, what led me here? How did I become this person? How did we wind up here? And then when you start to walk through that process, you start to go, well, I can't stay in this place. If I stay in this place, it's filled with death. It's filled with murder. It's filled with, corruption. You have to find something else to strive towards. So I think my advice would be, take stock of what brought you to that place. I mean, I would do that to anybody. I would do that to an alcoholic. I would do that to a drug addict. I would do that to, a world leader. I would say that to anybody. You have to look at what brought you here to this moment of desperation and be honest about it, right? Like, be honest about it. Move past the idea that there are things that can't be touched, like Islam, right? Like, because we talked about it, it's easy to see from the outside perspective that there are huge instabilities, political instabilities in countries that are more Islamic, right? And you have to kind of, I'm trying to be kind here, right? Because again, it's not all of them, but the more hardline a country is Islamic, the more and more instability. It's not just instability in that country; it's instability in their neighbors. It's global instability. It all leads to a certain place. Like, look at Iran, right? Like, they're hardliners, and the hardliners, they are influencing global conflicts and different things. So, my answer is be honest with what brought you there. Like, hold nothing back, turn everything over and look at how you got to that place, and what does it look like to move forward.
I think that's excellent advice to the people. If you're a leader in that kind of situation, what Jesus says is, whoever wants to become the greatest among you must first become the servant of all. And that is the path to service. And Jesus defines greatness as being prepared to lay down his life for his people, right? And that is how God defines what a great leader is, that in its essence. And the problem in a place like Sudan is there's going to be no trust in the government whatsoever right now. And you've got to figure out a way to build trust. And the best way to build trust is to be trustworthy.
Yeah, I think there is one other element that is playing a big role in Sudan. There is no unified identity in Sudan, right? They are split between, okay, the Arab descent Sudanese and non-Arab. They don't like each other, right? Sudan already split it in two countries already, right? Sudan was it was the biggest country in Africa, and now is Algeria. Uh, but this South Sudan, now look at South Sudan, right? I gave an example previously too, that how their governance work, how they see things, right? So the problem again, the problem on if you want to change that problem, we have to consider that people at the grassroots level have to change how they see their country being led by, right? So that is my take, that people need to be educated, that there should not be a confusion of what type of system they want. And I am not in favor of implementing a hybrid system or bringing a system from outside and implementing in the country, but it has to be unanimous. Everybody agrees whatever they want to implement on themselves.
Yeah. And again, Western democracy is not the only way to get there, but you've got to have certain principles of that.
Right.
So again, I know Saudi Arabia isn't perfect, but one thing they did really well is the Saudi government invested in their people. It paid for all of them almost to go be international students
Right.
in different countries.
Right.
And so to the point where I would say the average Saudi, to an extent, trusts the government to have a steady hand on the wheel, at least, right? Not absolutely, not completely by any means, but they trust their leadership to have somewhat of the country's best interests in mind. And the same is true with UAE as well.
Yeah, I think one element, I would say, it's not maybe not related but important to talk about, that many people in the West think that Western system, if implemented in those Muslim countries, will change the country. No, it's completely it's not true. Why I'm saying it's not true? Because of the mindset of those people, right? They believe that the change has to come from the top and someone will come and change that. And they believe in control. They are not ready to be implemented on that particular system where they want to change on the grassroots level. So Saudi Arabia and UAE, the recipe is that they are keeping their people happy, right? They have resources. The day Saudi Arabia go broke, you will see a civil war in Saudi Arabia, right? That's easy as you get. But again, going back to Sudan, I think the national identity is important if you want to build Sudan again, and it has to be, of course, you can borrow Christian principles, right? That if whoever is the leader is whoever is the prime minister. You mentioned what prime minister is.
First servant.
Yes, first servant, right? They have to see them as a servant, not the leader who leads and control things, but see themselves as someone who is the light of change in that country. And I think that will take care. But it's not overnight process. It's not gonna it's not a magic wand you swing and say, hey, now it's changed. It's the mindset that will change, and the generations to come after will see the fruit of it, I think.
Right. I completely agree. If you're the average Sudanese person watching this, my encouragement to you would be the biggest change that's needed in the country is not so much about leadership, it's about cultural renewal.
Right.
It's widespread transformation of hearts and minds. And the good news is you yourself can deal with your heart and mind, right? You can take that to God. You can strive to be the person God commands you to be, uh, which you can't do fully, which is exactly why you need to turn to Him and surrender your life to Him. Um, and that happens through the person of Jesus. But as you do that, you can have a glorious future with God, no matter what's happening in the country. But gradually, as hearts and minds change, person by person, soul by soul, individual by individual, then you can change the system to benefit people more broadly. And only through those individual transformations of hearts and minds will the country ever really get any better. Otherwise, people can continue to believe that might makes right. They're going to continue to believe that if we just had the right strong man at the top, if only I was that strong man at the top, then all of our problems would be solved.
And power corrupts people.
I mean,
Power does corrupt people.
I think like I'm looking at what happened in Turkey, after like a caliphate that stood for a very long time, and how people responded. They did have like a leader that spearheaded the change. It was Ataturk, right? But it he he kind of put forth this idea like there's a separation between our religion and our state, and that Islam would be like the religion of the heart and the mind, and not of the government.
But he was, I think there's a lot of negativity about Ataturk too, right?
Hush your mouth. No.
Okay.
Well,
As an ardent Erdogan supporter,
Yeah,
so the other part that I'm saying is, what he wound up doing was kind of returning power to the people, right? Like he didn't come with this message of yes, and then we'll implement the system and I will stay at the top, right? I mean, he did, stay at the top, but the whole idea was to implement a system where he wouldn't be there, that was going to move forward, and that, people who had been oppressively governed now had a voice, right? People who were oppressively governed had a say in how their country was going to be governed and how it moved forward. And, I'm saying that if that can happen there, it can happen anywhere, right?
yes and no at the same time.
Well, no. Okay. Well, this is an interesting point. Maybe, we're going to run out of time. But to conclude, what I'm saying is that the problem is in Turkey is it didn't stay that way, right? Like ultimate power corrupts ultimately, and over time, people just want to gain more power and get more influence and more of everything else, and that's where like the key value is humility, right? Humility coming from a leader, right? To be able to say, you know what, it's not so important that I stay in power; it's that you're in power,
Oh yeah.
right? It's that you have the freedom that God wants to give you to be able to determine your own destiny so that you can plot a way forward. And, whatever you would say about any leader, like Ataturk or anyone, right? They're going to be imperfect. They're going to have their flaws. And they're also facing things that I would say contextually you and I can't understand, because we weren't there. We didn't sit in their shoes. We read about it in history books and everything else like that. But we've got a different take on it now with perspective than they had that they didn't have back then. So I think that like it would be, I mean, like the word I want to use is like slang. It would be like a trip to see what would happen if a leader in the Islamic world took that approach
right?
and was able to successfully implement it.
Yeah, and so here's the thing, and I'll close with this: that there are people, and there have been Muslim leaders from Muslim cultures and who are devout Muslims themselves, who have had this sort of servant leadership kind of attitude.
Sure.
There have been people like that in history. But the problem is they're working against the center of gravity
Yep.
in the current Muslim psyche,
Right.
which is what we were talking about at the beginning of this segment, is this desire for a righteous leader who is going to be strong and kind of fix everyone's problems. While everyone wants that, democracy, decentralization isn't sustainable. And that's kind of what was starting to happen in the West as well.
Sure.
That we're getting sick of decentralized and we want
Well,
a messiah.
decentralism turned into globalism. And then I think that's when everybody was like, this is starting to get ridiculous. You know, you have like elites telling me what to do, and who's going to save me from that?
Right. When
Right.
people are looking for a strong man again.
Yeah.
And I would close this episode by saying, do not fall for it. There is only one king of the earth. There is only one Messiah, and his name is Jesus. Guys, thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We will be back next time.